بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. So welcome brothers and sisters. If anybody from the Telegram group has joined, welcome. If it's your first time, I'm assuming it's probably the same people anyway, but if not, then welcome. And I will, because I've set up that group. I mentioned it last week in this class actually. Because I've set up the group, I will inshallah try to put because I kind of like the simplicity of it and the fact that there's no distractions and no adverts and silly things like that. So we'll see how it goes and how it builds, but there'll probably be more activity on there than I've ever done on social media, conventional social media, at least, you know, Facebook and stuff like that, simply because I've never really liked that stuff and it's very distracting. And the thing about chat is that I'm on a few discussion groups with ulama, so I tend to be on there anyway, particularly at times when I'm taking a break or having leisure. It's a good way to catch up on what people are doing or discussing or saying, etc. We share lots of resources and articles and books and so on. So I tend to be on there. I've moved a lot of that stuff away from WhatsApp onto Telegram now. Not so much because of privacy concerns and things like that, but more because it was an excuse. It was a reason to try find it to be much better. I'm using it, and obviously didn't even know about Telegram channels and how they worked and the fact that they're actually pretty cool. But now I know, and quite a few people are on there now, mashallah. So we'll try and grow it together, and it's easier for me to be more active. Okay, inshallah. Barakallahu fikum. So today we'll go straight into the text, Muhasibi's Risala. And I kind of had a look at where we were, and we're on page 131. So we're actually almost 2/3 of the way through. So anybody that's joining now might be thinking, oh, what's the point? And the point is that it isn't really structured like your average book. It's not thematic. The chapter, and it doesn't necessarily previous chapters don't necessarily, new chapters don't build on previous chapters. So it's not constructive in that way. It's kind of Imam Muhasibi writing, he wrote some general advice, and he kind of goes, he repeats himself every so often, and he goes from one topic to another. It's kind of like nasiha basically, but it's very valuable. And the reason why it's studied so much and used so much and valued so much as a text is because it's one of the oldest texts that focuses on spirituality. And you know, sometimes it's just acceptance from Allah, right? So that's it. Anyway, so I've enjoyed teaching it. I think the students who have been regular have enjoyed studying it. So therefore, even if you have just joined now, you will still benefit from every single class. Previous lessons, the recent few weeks are available on the YouTube channel. And if anybody wants all of the sessions, all of the previous sessions kind of in one go right from the beginning, then you'll have to enroll onto the course via the Mawarid Lifestyle website. And then you'll have access to all of them. And I've got a volunteer right now working on moving some of those past videos and lessons onto YouTube. You know, he'll probably be able to do one a week or something like that. Still working on it, inshallah ta'ala. Okay. So it will come onto YouTube eventually for people who perhaps are thinking it's too much hassle to enroll. Enrollment's free, so it's not that much of a big deal, but you know, it's up to you, inshallah, how you do it. Okay, so so what I normally do is I read the text and then translate and explain. So Imam Muhasibi is kind of now providing some general words of nasiha and advice. And that's pretty much what we did last week, but it all kind of relates to advice that is to do with raising the bar in terms of our spirituality, in terms of our action, our conduct, our adab, and our etiquette, and the way we live our lives, right? So he tends to kind of push for standards that to us may feel a bit extreme. Okay, I'll point out what I mean as I explain, inshallah. So he says, وعليك بالتأني عند موارد العجلة وحسن الأدب في المخالطة ولا تغضب لنفسك على الناس واغضب لله على نفسك ولا تكافئن أحدا بإساءة واحذر المدح للجاهل بنفسه ولا تقبلها لنفسك من أحد وأقلل الضحك وجانب المزاح واكتم الأوجاع وأظهر التعفف واستبطن الثقة واستشعر اليأس وحسن الفقر واصبر على ما أصابك وارض بما قسم الله لك وكن من وعد الله على يقين ومن آثارك في وجل ولا تتكلفن ما قد كفيته ولا تضيعن ما وكلت بطلبه وافتقر إلى الله في كل عطائه وارغب في النجاة منه. I'll carry on a bit, inshallah. So then he says, وَاعْفُ عَمَّنْ ظَلَمَكَ وَأَعْطِ مَنْ حَرَمَكَ وَصِلْ فِي اللَّهِ مَنْ قَطَعَكَ وَآثِرْ فِي اللَّهِ مَنْ أَحَبَّكَ وَابْذُلْ نَفْسَكَ وَمَالَكَ لإخوانك ورع حقوق المولى في دينك ولا يعظمك كبير من المعروف تفعله ولا تحقرن صغيرا من المنكر تفعله. Okay, so I don't think I'm going to be able to get through all of that, but I'll try, inshallah. So he says, Bismillah, so he says, and always hold on to a calm demeanor and a calm, unhurried, unrushed demeanor, particularly at places, times, and occasions where you may feel rushed, or you may feel the need to rush. عند موارد العجلة, meaning where you feel, he uses the word mawarid, actually, same word as we use in Mawarid Lifestyle. And Mawarid means the place of water or the place of something, where something happens, where something occurs, where a place that is frequented for something, or it means source. It has a very similar meaning to Sharia, broadly speaking. Here he means Mawaridul Ajala, places where, or situations where you're likely to be rushed. In that situation in particular, just take a moment to just slow things down, right? And we're not obviously talking perhaps about life-threatening moments, although even in life-threatening moments, it's not a good idea to try to keep one's calm. So sometimes keeping our calm at times when we may feel the instinct to rush may mean to actually slow things down and not be hurried and not be rushed. At other times, it may well mean to act fast and to act quickly, but to be calm, right? To be calm and to try to keep a level head. It's not easy, it takes practice. Practice comes from trying to do these things consciously, so that even when you're doing mundane things, get used to not rushing and keeping a level head and keeping calm. Also, perhaps evaluate all of the times and moments in our day when we tend to rush through things and we tend to hurry, and why. Ask ourselves why are we so hurried? It goes without saying that if we were to evaluate our day, for many of us, sadly and unfortunately, salah will be one of those things that we will hurry through, as well as other aspects of ritual worship. And that's something really to evaluate and address. So, you know, if somebody hurried through their lunch, right, they may be told by, you know, a beloved person, maybe a parent, right, or a wife or a husband, don't do that, it's bad for you, blah blah blah, or something or other, you know, don't rush. But it's sometimes it's less of a concern when people rush through their salah and so on. So basically evaluate, but prioritize on the basis of, okay, you know, if I am rushing, if I'm hurried through things like salah and so on, why is that happening? al-muhasibi probably isn't even referring to that, but this is clearly a problem. Probably has always been, and the Prophet ﷺ spoke about people who basically wait till the end of time and then perform their salah and just, you know, peck the ground the way a chicken pecks the ground, kind of in that hurried fashion, in describing sujood in that way. So, you know, it's always been an issue. But if we evaluate our day in terms of where do we rush and where do we hurry and where do we lose our calm, then that's then in that our salah and our worship, our rights due unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should take a priority. But then other things are the same. It is generally a problem, right? So, you know, and some people, for some people more so than others, some people actually need to speed things up a little bit. They're just too slow, right? They're too relaxed. There's no sense of urgency, you know. And last week he mentioned this sentence. He said, where is it? Yeah, he said, وَلَا تَقْنَعْ مِن نَفْسِكَ بِالتَّرَبُّص, right? You know, that don't be content to wait around, okay? And this is what can happen if people become too relaxed. They're just waiting for things to happen. They're not out to go and get anything, right? So that's the difference. You know, there is a balance basically between rushing through things and affecting those things negatively so that nothing is done well, and being so laid back that nothing gets done at all in the first place. You don't commence to do anything. So this is the balance that we have to achieve. He then says, also hold on to husnul adab fil mukhalata. Hold on to excellent adab. I'm not going to translate it for a second. So excellent adab in your mingling. So basically hold on to excellent standards of conduct, right? Etiquette, refined behavior when you are mingling with others. Fil mukhalata, right? And you know, they say that ad-deenu kulluhu adab, all of religion, all of deen is adab. All of deen is refined behavior, right? It's following etiquettes when we do things, doing things in a particular way, finding an appropriate and proper way to do things, either because it's been enjoined directly by the Sharia, i.e. the Prophet ﷺ specifically taught it. So the fuqaha tend to when they are, for example, telling us how worship should be done, how salah should be done, they will, one of their practice is to say these are the essential components, the fara'id, these are the sunnah components, these are the makruhat, these are the things that break your worship, right, damage your worship. But they also include this section that is adab, right, the etiquettes. And etiquettes are things that beautify. So a person who conducts themselves with etiquette, with refined behavior when they mingle with others, then they are going to be somebody who will excel in the way they mingle with other people, and they will always act in a proper manner. Now, by that, I don't mean refined conduct and behavior in terms of the way people do things in upper class society, or the way people, or eating a particular way, or making sure you're using a knife and fork. I'm not talking about those types of things, right? I'm talking about the things that are that are more to do with our interaction, right? How we speak, how we listen, how we respond to what people are saying, infusing our conversation with patience, right? With calm, with tolerance, with those are the etiquettes that really matter. The etiquettes that are to do with our akhlaq, not so much. These things are not to be neglected completely. They are still part of etiquette, but not so much dress and appearance and, you know, and conforming to a particular social class or anything like that. That's not necessarily what's being intended here, although those things may well be part and parcel of etiquette depending on our circumstance. So it's all of that. Adab is a very, very broad word. Shaykh Abdul Fattah, in commenting on this particular line, says when, you know, he says that Ruwaym ibn Ahmad al-Baghdadi once gave this piece of advice to his son, right? He says, son, ij'al amalaka milhan, make your actions, he probably meant here your worship, right? Your deeds, make your deeds like salt, yeah, and make your etiquette, make your adab, again, difficult word to translate, but make your adab like flour. And he's trying to say that, so basically, sometimes when people make dough out of flour, the analogy here is they add a little bit of salt. They add a bit of salt to it. And he's giving him this piece of advice to tell him that the measure of adab in your life compared to the measure of amal, right? The ratio of amal to adab is one where is like the ratio of salt to flour, meaning to a whole bunch of flour you may add a sprinkle of salt, right? So let your deeds be like salt, no problem. You don't have to have an abundance of deeds, like you're doing things all day, you're in worship all day, etc., etc. But in whatever you do, make sure there is adab, and that your adab is abundant, right? That there is kathra in your adab. That's basically what he means. أي استكثر من الأدب حتى تكون نسبته في سلوكك من حيث الكثرة كنسبة الدقيق إلى الملح الذي يوضع فيه. Right? Let your adab in comparison to your deeds be the same as the little amount of salt that is put into flour, you know, to make the dough, basically. So this, you know, he used that basically as an analogy to make him understand that, look, you don't have to have a great amount of deeds, but etiquette is necessary. And it doesn't just apply to social interactions, it applies to worship. Worship is also a form of interaction, but it's interaction with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And worship is beautified by adab. Khushu' in salah, often many things that fall under the label of khushu' in salah, the fuqaha don't characterize as fara'id or wajibat, right? Things that we learn. When we learn salah, we learn these are the fara'id. If you miss one of your fara'id of salah, then your salah is not done, right? Like standing, sujood, ruku', etc. You miss a wajib and you have to, you know, you have to do a sujood sahu, at least in the Hanafi method, that's how it's taught, right? You know, and so on. But often these things are not, these things are like the essentials. And then you have the khushu', you concentrate, pay attention, remember that you're standing before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is the master of the universe, your creator, and so on and so forth. It's not mentioned in the fiqh books, right? And the implication is, or perhaps people can wrongly derive from that these things are not important. And they do sometimes. People, it's not in there. It's not, when I was taught salah, I wasn't taught these things, so therefore they're not important. These things fall under the category of etiquette, and some etiquettes are absolutely necessary. They're absolutely necessary. If you can't tolerate, in social gatherings, if you become an insufferable person, you can't put up with what anybody has to say. it may well be a matter of etiquette, and you may well think, well, this is just how I am. However, it is behavior that is very, very difficult for people to tolerate of you. It's actually a complete no-no. You would say that in social etiquette, in social conduct, that is a muharram. You know, that's haram, right? And practically speaking, you're going to be left with no friends. So in the same way, adab, beauty, is refinery in everything, including in worship, but also in our social interactions. Al-muhasibi, why is he specifically picking out mukhalata? Why is he picking out our social interactions when we mingle with people? Because of a really, really important observation, I think, and that is that it is often observed that when people start to prioritize their religiosity, they withdraw from society, either by way of just not being around, right, at all. They tend to enjoy solitude more, which is sometimes natural, or they withdraw by kind of becoming a person who nobody enjoys the company. And Muhasib is saying, actually, you can't just exclude that part of your life from the principle of adab. Adab is required there as well. Just because you feel that your solitude in dhikr or your solitude in worship and so on and so forth are things that give you much more spiritual nourishment, and therefore you enjoy it, you must also fulfill your social responsibilities and do that with adab. And that means wife, husband, family, and so on. And then the etiquettes are different in different places, right? You know, the etiquette with your wife or your husband is not the same as your etiquette in a gathering of strangers. And sometimes these things are dictated by urf, by convention, by customs and norms. And there's nothing wrong with that, provided that we acknowledge the importance of makarimul akhlaq being right at the center of all social adab. Makarimul akhlaq, right? The noble characteristics. And these are things like, you know, being empathic, being compassionate, being generous. Imam Muhasibi speaks. So throughout this course, we've been talking about some of these qualities again and again and again: being generous, being compassionate, being patient, being forbearing, being forgiving, you know, being understanding. You know, all of these are the makarimul akhlaq that are at the center of our etiquette. Then this is true kind of refinement of character. And then kind of on the peripheries are perhaps dressing appropriately and etc. And things like that are kind of, they're important, right? But they're kind of secondary. And the more kind of natural things, the more they conform to principles of the Sharia, the adab, the more important they are. Cleanliness, presentability, you know, these kind of things gather more important than eating with a knife and fork because that's what everybody else is doing. I'm not saying that's not important if that's the convention. I'm just saying there are more important things in one's conduct and behavior. A person can be as refined as possible on the dining table, but they're unclean and unkempt. That's something that's going to be frowned upon, and that would be that frowning upon would be consistent with the Sharia, because the Sharia looks down upon uncleanliness, right? So that's how we basically value things. We don't value things by metrics that are just social, but rather we still stick to social etiquette, but the hierarchy of those etiquettes is based upon what the Sharia values and the principles of the Sharia. Moving on, we can go on about these things, but otherwise we'll never get through these paragraphs. So he says, وَلَا تَغْضَبْ لِنَفْسِكَ عَلَى النَّاسِ, right? And this is, you know, actually something that is said of the Prophet ﷺ, that don't be angry at people for your own sake. Try not, I mean, he's not forbidding us. Sometimes it's very natural to get angry at people for our own sake. But if you want to reach higher standards of behavior, then one of the things to try not to do is to get angry for your own sake. Because don't make anger personal. Don't get angry because you've been offended. Don't be angry because the person has annoyed you, right? but try to be angry on principle, which in the Prophet's words, in Islamic terms, is described as being angry for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he says, but Imam Muhasibi words it in an interesting way. He says, don't be angry for your own sake. Don't be angry at people for your own sake, but be angry at yourself for the sake of Allah. This is now a kind of manifestation of the nafsul lawama that often people hear Imams talk about. Nafsul lawama, the blaming self. So Muhasibi is saying, if you've done something wrong, be angry at yourself for the sake of Allah. If you've been remiss, if you've fallen short, then be angry at yourself for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, don't make it personal, because if you make it personal, then you're going to end up with psychological issues, right? It has to be rooted on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the requirements of Allah's commands and the sunnah of the Prophet. That's where it has to be centered, and that's our earth wire. That's how we ground ourselves emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually, right? And people lose sight of that. Everything is personal, right? Everything is about me. I hate people because they've done this to me. I'm not going to be good to people because they've done this to me. It's always, it's everything is too personal. So it's good advice, right? Just generally, because essentially you emancipate yourself from lots and lots of baggage. Even if we speak not in spiritual terms and speak in psychological terms and emotional terms, right? If you're not impacted by, if you don't let, in layman's terms, if you don't let people get to you, you save yourself and free yourself from the emotional baggage that comes with being annoyed at them and being upset with them, right? So spiritually, of course, anger is bad anyway, right? The Prophet ﷺ 3 times, when somebody asked him for advice, said, La taghdab, la taghdab, la taghdab. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises the pious as people who وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ, can suppress anger and can forgive people, right? So Imam Muhasibi is saying, okay, anger is normal, but try to not be angry for yourself. At least don't make a habit of it, because it does happen with human beings, but be angry against yourself for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and don't get into the habit of seeking to do bad in return for bad. Someone does something bad to you and you become obsessed about doing it back. So again, in lay terms, this attitude of I'm gonna get you back, right? So he's saying, don't do that. لا تكافئن أحدا بإساءة. Don't try to give somebody back as much evil as you've got from them. I suppose is the best way I can express that, right? Again, because it's how you're not going to be able to, you won't know where to stop. It's people start to think in that way because they're emotional. They become vengeful, and when people become vengeful, they lose control. Even if it's not the physical kind of vengeance. Somebody swore at you, you want to swear back. But usually, if you start developing that attitude, then then in return for one insult, one wants to return two. That's what we naturally want to do. We want to lash back, and we want to give back double what we got. They hurt us, we want to hurt back, but we want to hurt back harder. So he uses the word mukafa'a. Mukafa'a implies giving back in equal measure, right? It comes from kufu, which means equal, right? But that's not the reason why you don't try to give back in equal measure, even though it may even in many contexts be permissible, right? The Quran speaks about vengeance being a right. The problem with it is that if it is done, if there is no process to it, and it's just offense versus offense, you offended me, I'm going to offend you back, chances are it's never mukafa'a, it's never equal, right? We always try, it becomes competitive. And one person is trying to outdo the other. One person throws one insult, the other person throws a worse one, not an equal one, worse one, or throws two. Then this person throws a worse one or throws three, and it just becomes a cycle. So he says, don't get into that, right? You're a believer, don't get into that. لا تكافئن أحدا بإساءة. Okay, and again, why would people do that? Because they're getting angry for themselves. So don't get angry for your own sake, right? And which implies that you get angry for Allah's sake. And I'll get to questions, by the way. So let your questions come. I'll come to them. Okay. So I can see them as they're unfolding. So don't get angry for yourself, but get angry for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What does that mean? Don't make it personal. Make it about principle. Okay. So for a Muslim, okay, like principle is it can sound like quite a secular phrase, right? The reason why I put it like that is because where do we get our principle from? We get our principle from the Sharia, right? So it's better to be upset in principle rather than be upset than make it personal. Now the problem with not controlling these impulses, the impulse to lash back, and the kind of not to resist, not even the temptation, but the natural reaction to get angry and be personally insulted, is that in the end we lose sight of who it is that is becoming the victim of our vengeance, right, of our reciprocation. And it's sometimes it's adults, sometimes it's the elderly, and sometimes it's children, right? How many parents physically harm their children purely because of anger, because they are enraged, not out of principle, not because the child has done something really, really bad, but because they are just angry. How many teachers beat up their students? I mean, it doesn't happen so much in the UK anymore, but it's happening around the world all the time. How many teachers punish children not because they've done something that necessarily deserves it, but because they are angry? Well, it doesn't matter. I mean, it can be detention, but the detention is not really justified by the deed, but justified by the anger of the teacher, or it's because of the anger of the teacher. Had it not been for the anger, then maybe it would have been pardoned. So this is what we have to reflect on. Okay. He then says, وَحْذَرِ الْمِدْحَةَ لِلْجَاهِلِ بِنَفْسِهِ. This is so cool. I want to memorize that line, right? He says, beware of the ignorant person praising himself. Right? Now, if I'm doing that myself, what's al-muhasibi saying? If I'm doing it myself, constantly praising myself, what's he saying? He's basically saying, well, you're the ignorant one. Right? You know, Allah forgive us, we all do it, right? But there is nothing uglier than a person blowing his or her own trumpet. From an Islamic etiquette point of view, there's nothing that's uglier than a person blowing his or her own trumpet, especially when there is absolutely no constructive need. You know, you're not in a job interview, right? Nobody's asked you about yourself, something about yourself. You're not necessarily being factual. You're just basically speaking of yourself in inflated terms. Why would you do that? It doesn't make any sense. So al-muhasibi is saying this is an act of ignorance, right? And people like that are problematic. That it's such a deep character flaw. Be wary of these people. And often they can't be trusted. People who, everyone does it to an extent, but people whose sentences often begin with, I am this and I am like this. I'm the type of person that. I am not the type of person that. I am not like this. Constantly declaring themselves free of certain flaws, constantly saying, I have these qualities and so on and so forth. Muhasib is saying, well, beware of these people. Beware of the jahil who praises himself. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, فَلَا تُزَكُّوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَعْلَمُ بِمَنِ اتَّقَى. Stop declaring how pure you are. Stop declaring your own purity, how pious you are, how wonderful you are. Stop declaring your purity. Allah knows who is pious. Okay? So, you know, first, don't. So, what do we psychologically? What happens to us when we hear this? When we hear things like this, right? Our mind immediately goes to somebody who we know who's like that. right? That is an immediate and instant trick of the shaitan and a trick of the ego, right? Rather, the appropriate reaction is to ask ourselves, am I that jahil? Am I that jahil? Am I doing that? That's the first thing that we have to do in order to basically first and foremost rule ourselves out. Okay, other people and how they're behaving shouldn't matter to us so much unless they are people who might listen to our nasiha, right? But really, it's about ourselves. This is about improving ourselves, not about thinking, oh yeah, that's so, yeah, it's interesting. That's exactly how people are. Yeah, I know people who are like that. That's actually not the point of this discourse. The whole point of this discourse is to reflect it back at ourselves. So beware of the ignorant person who praises himself. And another valuable piece of advice on that front, لا تقبلها لنفسك من أحد. Don't accept praise for yourself from anyone. The Prophet ﷺ said something so harsh. Don't take this literally and don't do it, because you'll end up in fights. But he says, the Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith, إذا رأيتم مداحين فاحثوا في وجوههم التراب. If you see people who excessively praise, and by that he meant people who praise to people's faces, right? People who excessively praise, throw soil in their face. Why? Because they're very, very bad for other people's ego. They're bad for you, right? Imam al-Ghazali and others have written about how praising children should be moderated. It should be used and it's good, but it should be moderated, and it should not be shouldn't be excess, and it shouldn't be undeserved. Right? Children should be praised, perhaps a little bit extra to encourage them further when they have done something good, right? But remember, that we shouldn't be stingy and miserly in noticing good. Children do amazing things, right? Parents don't even take notice. So there's lots and lots of opportunity for legitimate praise. Don't get into the habit of just wanton, empty praise for no reason, just to inflate their ego, because it's bad for them. It's essentially, that's how children grow up with egotistical characteristics, because all they've ever received is undeserved praise, unwarranted praise. All right, and often praise for things that are aesthetic in nature. All right, don't like some of the scholars talk about, when they talk about bringing up children, they say moderate how much time your children spend in front of mirrors. In fact, that's something that we should moderate for ourselves. Why? Because it inflates the ego. Learn to develop a balanced ego in children. We struggle with that as adults, right? This doesn't even come into consideration with parenting. But praise has a lot to do with it. Not praising is damaging. Praising too much is harmful. Adults being excessively praised, right, is both bad for the ones receiving the praise, and it's terrible for the one who dishes it out. And usually people who excessively praise, they don't mean it. People who excessively praise, they don't mean it. And it's like, as imams get a lot of it, and some of us do lap it up. I have to say from personal experience, it's horrible. It's a horrible experience, right? People sitting there and just praising you to your face. It's a horrible experience. It's not nice. And then you're forced into that position of now attracting more praise, because if you act modestly, then people are like, oh look, he's so humble, he's so modest. More of it. It's just a horrible cycle. There's no need for it, right? Attribute things to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Somebody's done something good, say mashallah, say tabarakallah, make dua for them for barakah. That's enough praise. But ultimately you've directed praise to he who deserves it, which is it's been directed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Make praise constructive. If praise is going to make a person, an employee, more dedicated, or make a person feel valued, then to the measure of that need, use it. Just don't make it excessive. That's the key. Right? Don't make it excessive. And the way this is supposed to balance out, it's supposed to balance out because in a society of balanced characters, you're not excessively praising because the other person doesn't need it, because they have a balanced character. Nowadays, these things are encouraged in the workplace and so on because of the fact that that's the only way to motivate people. People aren't motivated by duty, responsibility, accountability, amana, having to answer before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the wages they get. No, right? It's like, does my boss like me or not? What's the evidence of that? Praise or not praise, and so on. And therefore, the behavior of employers and elders and adults and teachers and so on and so forth is also then on that basis, right? It's basic, it's not healthy. And remember, if you see something good in someone, you must always attribute it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In fact, there's dangers associated with this, and this is how, if you are praising somebody, always say mashallah, always say tabarakallah, always say Allahumma barik lahu, Allah bless you. And the Prophet ﷺ says that if you see something in someone that you like, that pleases you, that you find to be to have like a wow factor, right? Then don't just go wow, amazing, and then stop, right? Always say mashallah, always tabarakallah, because there's something that happens to a person in that moment. Not always, but sometimes there's something that comes over us in that moment that results in what is often known as the evil eye, right? The ayn. And if it hadn't come from the Prophet ﷺ, none of us would have believed it. If it hadn't come from the Prophet ﷺ that al-aynu haqqun, that the evil eye is true, we would never have believed it, right? But it is. It's one of those unseen things. Okay, so there's protecting ourselves from it, and in a culture of excessive praise, it's a danger. So there's protecting ourselves from it, making sure that we read our du'as, etc. I always give this basic prescription that everyone should be able to do as a minimum. Obviously, there's a lot more, but as a minimum, ikhlas, falaq, nas, in the morning, in the evening, after every salah, before you go to sleep. If you know it, include ayatul kursi with that. In the morning, in the evening, after every salah, before you go to sleep, as a bare minimum. There's lots of other things that the Prophet ﷺ taught. There's a reason why the Prophet ﷺ taught us so many du'as every single day throughout the day that have meanings of protection in them. There's a reason for it. The reason is that there are physical, visible, perceptible dangers, and there are also invisible and imperceptible dangers, right, that we face, right? And we need the protection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from all of them, right? But from the ones that we don't see, the only protection is spiritual. The only protection is spiritual in nature, right? The shaitan, for example, runs away when he hears the adhan. These things protect us from the shaitan. They protect us from the evil eye, these du'as and so on. We've got no other protection against these things. You can't wear a suit, all right? There's no bulletproof vest against the evil eye. The only thing is spiritual protection, right? If the other person is giving off that I mean, I don't know what to call it. Some ulama say that it's some kind of unseen effect conveyed by the person when they give a certain type of envious look. Allahu a'lam, right? Others say it's just something that comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, part of Allah's system of cause and effect. That there is a cause and effect at play with regards to the evil eye. But the only protection for it is also from the unseen, from the ghaib, which is to seek Allah's protection, to take refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also safeguard ourselves from being the person that casts the evil eye. And the way to do that is to always attribute the other person's good trait that we have seen, that we want to praise, attribute it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Say mashallah, say tabarakallah. The Prophet ﷺ specifically mentioned the words Allahumma barik lahu, or he said make dua for blessing. So you don't have to therefore use a particular set of words. You can just say mashallah tabarakallah, or just say tabarakallah. The reason why people popularly say mashallah is because there's a verse in the Quran that talks about وَلَوْلَا إِذْ دَخَلْتَ جَنَّتَكَ مَا شَاءَ اللَّهُ, about a person who had this wonderful garden and who kept attributing the splendor of that garden to himself, and his pious friend said to him, well, if only when you go into your garden you would say masha Allah la quwwata illa billah, right? it is as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed it, and there's no power except by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the principle is the same. Attribute the positive thing that you have seen to the person who truly deserves it, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because if it wasn't for him, it wouldn't happen. It can't happen if it wasn't for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if it isn't by Allah's allowance. And the Prophet ﷺ, in addition, in the hadith, specifically said, make dua for the person for barakah. Okay, inshallah. Waqtum al-awja', I think we can get through this. Right. Waqtum al-awja' wa adhhir al-ta'affuf. Oh, last line in this paragraph, he says, and like, take this as it is. Wa aqlil ad-dhihka wa janib al-mizah. Reduce laughter and turn yourself away from too much joking. Mizah is joking, right? So much is made of sense of having a sense of humor and making people laugh and smile, etc. There's nothing wrong with it, but don't make that being funny from an Islamic perspective. Being funny isn't necessarily a praiseworthy quality, right? I mean, nowadays it's a big deal because it's socially useful, but it's not really. When we talk about makarimul akhlaq, those beautiful character traits, being funny isn't one of them, right? Laughter isn't bad, it's fine, but فَلْيَضْحَكُوا قَلِيلًا وَلْيَبْكُوا كَثِيرًا. On balance, people should be crying more and laughing less, right? لو تعلمون ما أعلم لا ضحكتم قليلا ولا بكيتم كثيرا. The Prophet ﷺ said, if you knew what I know, you'd laugh less and you'd cry more, right? And the point being that, if you understood how near Allah is to your actions and how much He knows and how intimately He knows, and if you understood how detailed the angels are recording your actions and what's in store in the akhirah, if you understood how Allah waits to hear your appeals and give you what you want, right, then you'd be crying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala far more than you would be rejoicing and laughing and wasting your time on those types of things, because essentially that's, laughter comes from a particular attitude to life. So people will say, we need to take things lightheartedly. No, you don't take things lightheartedly, you take things seriously. The lightheartedness, it's interspersed. It's there sometimes, it's necessary, it's there with children, it's there at times of leisure and so on. It's not the overbearing characteristic of a person, right? Again, al-muhasibi isn't saying don't do it. He's saying you have to have perspective, right? And if people who are materialistic, they find meaning in things like comedy and laughter because there is no meaning anywhere else. Okay, so it's not about being sour and sad, right? But it's just about having more gravity, right? Having more gravity than less. That's basically what it means. Waqtumil awja'a, and of course the Prophet ﷺ joked, right? But it was on occasion, right? It was when the opportunity arose. It wasn't something that the Prophet ﷺ kind of, when the Prophet ﷺ's character is described and his life is described, there are jokes, they're here and there, right? But they're not, it's not like, oh, he was so funny. You don't see that kind of description of anyone among the Salaf, right? But nowadays it's such a big deal. Oh, he's fun, really, really funny. That's, having a sense of humor perhaps is necessary, and people should have a sense of humor. That doesn't mean they have to be funny all the time and they have to crack jokes all the time. Okay, there's times for it. Okay, waqtumil awja', shuyukh are described as, oh, that sheikh is boring. This sheikh is really, really good because he's funny. I've never understood that. Like, yeah, okay, I get it, but do you go to listen to a talk to laugh? How can you learn? Do you go to your university lecturer hoping to have a good laugh? I'm going to go, I have a lecture today, you know, it's in chemistry, etc. I'm going to have a good laugh. You don't do that. So why would listening to discussions about Deen and Quran and Sunnah be about laughter? It doesn't make sense. Okay, yeah, fine. The guy is trying to appease to what has become people's attitude, right? And he's trying to make you laugh. But that's not the reason why you go. You go to learn. You go to take inspiration, not for comedy and laughter. You know, and perhaps it works for people. I suppose it's understandable that it would work nowadays, right? But that's not a characteristic that stands out, right, as one that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to see in us. Because then you end up actually not taking the deen seriously, because that is, in the end, that's the manifestation. That's what happens in the end. Okay. There's a few questions. So as much as I wanted to do another paragraph, but we'll do it next week, inshallah. But I'm going to take some questions. In the Zoom class, if you have questions, I haven't seen them yet. I haven't even opened the Zoom chat today. So sorry about that. Oh yeah, so we've got something on the Zoom and we've got questions on YouTube. So, assalamu alaikum wa alaikum salam. Would it be hypocritical to have a different type of behavior, less guarded, sometimes critical, etc., with your family than that with the public? Without maybe responding to that specific question, you know, the general rule should be that whatever we can, this is very hard to do, by the way, that's why I'm pointing it out, right? So whatever good conduct we deem to be part of the perfection of our character, as taught by the Prophet ﷺ, the characteristics that are interactive, meaning that they surface in our interactions with people, they tend to be, they're often, you know, in some hadith they're described as sadaqah, like smiling, right? Because they're good deeds, right? Whether it's been specifically mentioned as a sadaqah or not, these are good deeds. And if it's good deeds in the context of interacting with others, then it is a good deed done to the other as well. Often it's a good deed done to the other, an act of love, an act of compassion, even the expression of sympathy, the expression of, or the feeling of empathy, you know, just generosity, even generosity with your time, right? These are all they're not just you being a nice person. These are acts of giving as well. And in all of those things, this is the point, those closer to us have a greater right than others. Really hard to do. I mean, I get it wrong all the time, but those close to us have a greater right to it than others. Having said that, there is a reverse picture, which is, you know, bad behavior, the opposite of the good characteristics. When it comes to the bad characteristics, our bad characteristics will be tolerated by those close to us more than by others. Number one. Number two, those close to us are probably more willing and better able to forgive us and pardon us, as opposed to those who perhaps we may have accidentally met. So while there is no excuse for bad behavior against anyone, or being overly critical of anyone, your children and so on and so forth, and we have to balance this out and moderate this out, there are greater dangers in bad behavior towards strangers. Because what is how do you you know, if what is the expiation for swearing at somebody and abusing somebody? How do you get that? What is the tawbah for it? It's a major sin. What is the tawbah? Well, the tawbah is regret it, promise not to do it again to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And restrain yourself from it, meaning, so stop the sin, regret having done the sin, promise not to do it. This is to Allah. And return what you have taken from the other. If you have taken a piece of their honor, give it back. That means apologize. right? If you've hurt someone's feelings, repair that, and the way to do that doesn't always work, but the minimum, the requirement is to get that person to forgive you. How are you going to do that if that's somebody you bumped into on the train? How are we going to do that if that's somebody that we got into a row with in a road rage incident, or over the queue in the in the supermarket, something like that, and our reaction was harsh and unjust? It wasn't justified. I mean, okay, there's some slack where there was justification, but we weren't justified. We swore at the person through abuse, effing and blinding, and etc. etc. Flew off the handle. How do you fix that if you don't even know who that person is? You've never met them before, never seen them before, don't know where they are, don't know, you're gonna wait around at that supermarket or something like that. So that's the thing. So and the ulama say, well, if there's nothing you can do, then give some sadaqah on behalf of the person, in the hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will balance things out on the day of judgment. So there's a reason to be extra cautious with people outside, right? The reason shouldn't necessarily be not to look bad in front of people outside, because the greater concern should be looking bad in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there is this, I think this is what creates the imbalance. I think because we are more guarded outside, because we know it's harder to get away with behaving badly outside, sometimes what happens is we allow all of our bad behavior to spill out around the people that we love, our parents, sometimes our spouses, our wives and our husbands, sometimes our children. Having a bad day, you can't let it out at work, can't let it out anywhere else, let it out here. And we should try, this is a major challenge for everybody, right? And we should try to rise above that, and try to basically find other ways to overcome our anger. First and foremost, let's develop some perspective about anger. I personally, I'm a bad-tempered person, right? So it's a tough one, it's like something that I've struggled with and tried to deal with throughout my life, but it does get better. But the main thing is to be mindful of it. You can improve, you can get rid of the problem, sometimes maturity is needed and so on, but mindfulness is the key. You're flying off the handle at everybody, getting angry and so on and so forth, and you're not mindful of it. So either you've got to be mindful, or you have to have good friends. You have to have people around you who will always tell you the truth. All right? Don't make friends who will praise you in all circumstances. Don't. They're not. The jahil who basically just praises himself and then praises you. You don't need friends like that. All right? Friends are people who will help you become a better person. They're the best friends, right? And that means that if you're out of order, they'll tell you you were out of order. Okay, so they're like a mirror, basically. Let's go. Let's take a Zoom question. How can we be aware of someone who praises themselves too much? They'll just do it, right? But the way you can be wary of them, actually, that's your question, right? How are you wary of them? They'll eventually harm you in some way. Wary of them means be careful of dealings with them and things like that. Because when do people praise themselves a lot? They praise themselves a lot when they need something from you to earn your trust. They do it to earn your trust. They do it to get you to give them something, or to take something from you, or for you to kind of to drop your guard or something along those lines. Be wary of people who overly praise themselves, right? Because again, it doesn't mean there's evil behind it. Wariness just means be careful. Your guard should come up. What's going on? Why is this guy talking about himself so much? Why is this person talking about themselves so much, right? Be wary of them. As a bare minimum, they're not the kind of people you want to make your best friend, all right? Because they're not going to be very good for you, right? So, and if they do happen to be your best friend, your brother, your sister, your family member, then some nasiha is necessary, right? And it could start with you saying, do you think I talk about myself too much? Like, I heard that's really, really bad, blah, 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 blah. Perhaps subtly see if they might go and reflect on that themselves. Okay, so, there's sometimes you have to help people, and sometimes people who need something from you, who feel the need to justify what they're asking you, an investment. They're trying to invest you. Oh, I've never been known to rip people off. I've never been known to do that. I've never failed in anything, blah, 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 blah. Honestly, I'd be careful. I've reflected on people who've harmed me, right? In some way or other. I thought, and I'm not saying I don't necessarily have that trait, right, of praising myself. Everybody does it to some extent, and Allah forgive us and maybe eliminate it. But there is, you can kind of, I can count on my fingers the people who've done some sort of harm to me, right? Taken money, not giving it back, or something along those lines, right? And the vast majority of them, that trait exists. That trait exists, right? You sit with them. There'll be a few sentences of self-praise, right, of talking about themselves. Sometimes it's not even relevant. Oh, like I never. And then you'll often find that they are the opposite of how they keep describing themselves. So actually, that self-praise comes from an insecurity. It comes from an insecurity, right? Sometimes that's how it is. Allahu Alam. And would you say that many Muslims take things so seriously in a negative sense, and that results in them being rather draining? Yeah, many Muslims do take things too seriously when they shouldn't, when there's no need to, right? Going overboard about people's physical appearances, going overboard about little minutiae and things like that, when there are, that's not the point. Look, Imam al-Muhasibi speaks about reduce joking and laughter and things like that, but what does he start with? What's his first sentence? His first sentence is وَحُسْنُ الْأَدَبِ فِي الْمُخَالَطَةِ, right? Being a sour person in social contexts is not good adab. Good adab is to be smiley, right? Good adab is to engage in conversation. Good adab is to tolerate people's harm. The Prophet said, I mentioned this hadith to you before, the person who engages people, speaks to them, mixes with them, and tolerates the harm they throw at them is better than the person who, and I'm paraphrasing, is better than the person who stays away from people, right? Is a recluse. الذي لا يخالط ولا يصبر, the one who doesn't mingle and therefore doesn't show any patience. So the point is that it part of good conduct is to smile and to be jovial and to be pleasant and so on, right? But then to joke about everything isn't necessarily a good character trait either, and and nor is laughing at everything and all the time. All opportunities are not opportunities of laughter. There's lots and lots of serious things in life. If you're at home and you're constantly kind of laughing and joking, your children aren't going to take you seriously. Okay, so my point is that there is a balance when it comes to matters of deen as well. Yes, sometimes what the sister is asking is really to do with placing emphasis, religious emphasis on disproportionate religious emphasis on things. All right, so going overboard about something that is mustahab, right, but undermining fard, being lax about ghiba, but criticizing people because they don't wear a hat or because their beard is 1 inch too short, or something like that, right? Like looking down on a woman because she doesn't practice the same madhab as you, or doesn't practice the way you do. It could be a matter of difference of opinion. A woman who wears the niqab looks down on a woman who doesn't. A brother who has a beard thinks he's following the sunnah, looks down on somebody who doesn't have a beard or has a short beard. Things like that, but yet ignores the fact that when he went and said that to his friend, oh, look at these people, like, the Shaykh said that people who have short beards, they're fusaq. Some people actually believe, have that opinion, right? But he's completely ignorant of the fact that what he just did is backbiting. It's a major sin. At least that's a matter of difference of opinion. It may well be that his short beard is accepted in the Sharia because there's an opinion that says that's permissible, right? But nobody says backbiting is permissible. So sometimes it's about disproportionate placing of importance, not placing things where they belong. Okay, is there a remedy from Quran and Sunnah for short temper and anger? I mean, one obviously is to always be mindful, right? And that's, I'm not using the modern sense of mindfulness. I'm using the sense of ihsan and taqwa. And people, and if the whole idea of being aware of the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala watches us is to be aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's watchfulness and awareness and knowledge of all of our deeds. And those include the deeds that have some sort of obvious physical manifestation, right? You know, I pick this up, there you go, there is an obvious physical manifestation right here, you know. But some actions are about attitude, right? They're about social conduct that is not necessarily word spoken, right? Their behaviors and attitudes. Those things are also actions, so we need to be mindful of those things. So that's the first thing as a kind of baseline rule. Then the Prophet ﷺ has in the Sunnah recommended things like sitting down if you're standing, and also you know, making wudu to calm anger, which kind of takes you into the domain of change your scene, right? Salawat on the Prophet ﷺ, sending salah on the Prophet ﷺ breaks people's anger because it calms people down, which is why, you know, often the Arabs, when people are angry, they'll say Salli ala nabi, send salah on the Prophet, say Durood Sharif, basically. And it works because it completely deflects, right, a person from this moment of personal fury to sending praise on the Prophet ﷺ, and suddenly the anger is gone. Right, so there are remedies, yes. And two more. If you have to go, you can go. We're way over time. Other expectations for praising one another, e.g., spouses praising and showing gratitude for one another, etc. I think gratitude is different to praise, you know, and praise where praise is deserving moderately is fine. The Prophet ﷺ praised people. The praise we're talking about is excessive praise, right? Deserving, undeserving, you're at it all the time. Basically, we all have a responsibility to each other's egos. That's what you have to bear in mind. You know, so therefore, moderate praise on that on that basis, and but where it's deserved, where it's needed, you know, it needs to. A husband needs to tell his wife that she's beautiful. That's not excessive praise, right? That's normal. A wife needs to sometimes praise her husband because over here it's not so much you excessively praising them, but more helping giving them reassurance, because every husband and wife has a bit of insecurity about, you know, about how the other feels about them. Do you understand? Anybody that doesn't have that is overconfident. All right. You know, and is probably going to end up letting go of themselves. So there sometimes praise is for reassurance, right? I'm talking about excessive and unjustified, unwarranted praise to people's faces all the time. Okay, people close to us, we try to, you know, we are their solace, we're their comfort, where, you know, we try to we help them overcome their insecurities. Sometimes you have to balance out people's insecurities by constantly reassuring them that no, they are not what people think they are. They are not what people are saying they are. They are X, Y, and Z, right? But we have to do that. You know, sometimes if a person is overly focused on a negative aspect of themselves, on a weakness, it may be necessary to balance that out by showing them what they're good at. But here it's constructive. Okay, so excessive praise is what we're talking about. The Prophet ﷺ says, إِذَا رَأَيْتُم مَدَّاحِينَ. He didn't say madihin, he said maddahin. He says, if you see people who are excessively praising, throw soil into their faces, right? They're constantly at it. You know, constantly at it. Every time they see you, they come up with, you know, and sometimes it's mujamala, right? Mujamala is sycophancy, you know, just They just want to get in your good books, right? And sometimes it's just a bad habit. You understand? They just need to cut down. Okay, and finally, are there situations where we should specifically praise people? I think I've answered that. Okay, inshallah. You should acknowledge people's good. If there's a situation of praise and you don't praise, right? That's kind of, you're gonna appear as though you're a bit off, that you don't like the person, right? What I mentioned in the lesson was that the way to praise, the Islamic way to praise, is to attribute the person's quality and achievement to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first, and then to praise them moderately and show happiness. More important than praise is to be happy for someone that they have achieved something, right? And the praise should come from that. Excessive praise is when you're just throwing it for no reason and it's constantly happening, right? I've come across people who, they'll meet you, the first 2 or 3 sentences are showering praise on you, right? Whether it's an uncle or whether it's somebody who's in your congregation, it makes a person really, really uncomfortable. And most people will feel uncomfortable when it's excessive, right? When it's warranted, justified, it's constructive, when there is truly an achievement, then obviously those are appropriate times of praise. Okay, and the Prophet ﷺ showed that. Yeah. Okay, inshallah, that's it. We have to close there. See you all next week, inshallah ta'ala. And there will be a recording. It'll be on YouTube. Some of the recent recordings aren't on the website, but if anybody's caught up that far, do let me know. And I said that I was going to put an audio only recording on the Telegram group, inshallah ta'ala. So I'll do that. If you're not on the Telegram group, then check it out. It's on the, where is it? On the Facebook page, on the Mawarid Lifestyle Facebook page, and on my Facebook page, there's a link to the Telegram group, inshallah ta'ala. Right now, I can't think of any other way to tell you. Okay, Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm sure you all have to go. I suppose I could put the link in if I have my Telegram open. I do, yes. So I'll put the link in the chat, inshallah, in both chats if you're not on there. I know some of you are, so I'm not too worried. Okay. There it is. That's the Telegram link there, and there it is. If you're not on, please join it. I'm going to be a little bit more active there than on social media. I don't like Facebook and stuff like that, and I don't do anything on Twitter, I do nothing on Instagram. I hate them, they're distracting. But I do it because it might benefit people, and partly because I also need to let people know what's going on. But I don't like it. I mean, this Telegram seems like a much more simplified format. I don't know why I didn't discover it before, but I have now, so it's great. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.